So I'm first curious about your experience growing up with sickle cell. So when did you first realize you had sickle cell?
Oh, that's a really good question, Bria. Thank you for asking it. I think that um, there's kind of two spaces of realizing I had sickle cell and then the fact of realizing that I had sickle cell forever. So the first time I realized I had sickle cell, I was a pretty little kid, being in the hospital a lot as a young little human. I didn't always understand exactly what was going on, but my mom always equated it to being like a really bad cold. She said, "You're just like everyone else, but when you get colds, we call them, or episodes. Your episodes send you into the hospital, so you have to go to the emergency room or to and be admitted. And so, or you experience pain or a pain crisis. So for me as a child, as a young one, it was that was kind of like my first realization. I was probably around 5 or 6 years old when I was like, "This is like our journey." I think I understood what that was.
Hmm.
Um, I was around 18 when I realized sickle cell wasn't going to go away. And it seems like it's a little old. You think, you've lived with it for this long, you would kind of realize, but it wasn't until I was kind of going out on my own as a young adult and I recognized that just because I was transitioning from a child into adulthood, that it didn't mean that sickle cell was all of a sudden going to just disappear out of my life. And
Hmm.
that was something that I had to come to an understanding about.
Hmm. Wow, thank you for sharing that. So I know that you talked about kind of what it was like growing up, but how do you feel about having sickle cell?
How do I feel? That's such a broad
Hmm.
question, and it's a good question, but it's a really broad question because I think there are a lot of answers, right?
Hmm.
Sickle cell it's not a one-dimensional thing. Everything in my life is affected by sickle cell. I don't get to like take a day off from having sickle cell like I would love to do.
Hmm.
Um, sometimes I feel empowered. Sometimes I feel weak. Sometimes I feel angry and sad. I think all of those emotions and that complete range of emotions is what sickle cell kind of is to me. It's not just one singular thing. I think it depends on what else is going on in my life and how I'm able to manage and cope with sickle cell. I know while having sickle cell and being pregnant, I was angry every day because I wanted to feel like the other mommies out there having babies, and I wanted to feel like I had some semblance of self control. However, it was nothing more real then in that day and age when I was having this little life born inside of me who is literally taking everything that I had to offer. Um, and I realized that sickle cell was a lot more than I had ever really given it credit for, as far as just how it made me feel day to day. I'm really good, and I think a lot of warriors like myself, we call ourselves warriors. We don't call ourselves sickle cell patients. A lot of warriors like myself. We get so used to being in pain, we get so used to feeling fatigue that sometimes we don't even realize that we're that way until it's really bad, until we
Hmm.
have to kind of fight through the next.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, all those emotions that you just described are absolutely valid, and I appreciate you sharing that aspect of it. So I'm curious also, how has being a warrior impacted you and your relationship with your family, such as your brother who also has sickle cell?
Yes. Well, Bria is my first cousin. I adore her. She's not only my cousin, she's become my friend as we've gone
Oh.
into this later in life journey, and I just adore her. So she understands that my brother has sickle cell as well, and you know, at times, my brother and I felt like we were always on such a different level. He wasn't hospitalized quite as often as I was, and he didn't have to experience the ins and outs and the ups and downs of sickle cell. So I was often the one kind of bearing the brunt of it. And
Hmm.
I remember being a young person in my like 12 and 13, trying to find someone else out there like me. And because of all these regulations with HIPAA, your doctor couldn't just introduce you to another sickle cell
Right.
patient and say, "Hey, they have what you have. This should be your friend." So for me, I was always lacking. I was always looking for someone who understood me a little bit more, who had the desire to get to know me more. And I found that that was sometimes very challenging. So I think that's where I threw myself into advocacy, because I was looking for someone who understood me. My family doesn't always understand the nuances. There are days where it's hard to get out of bed, where it's hard to put my feet on the ground,
Mhm.
where there are days where just living a normal day is very difficult. Yet, because I have a husband who needs to be fed and a son who needs to be loved and taken care of, I don't always get to take those moments and take those breaks and, get give time to myself. So a lot of times
Mhm.
I'm often forced to reconcile me, the mommy and the wife and the advocate versus Heather, the sickle cell warrior, and making sure that I'm taking care of myself as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that's important to call out. Um, so I'm also curious, you kind of touched on it a little bit about your experiences as a mom with sickle cell and also as a wife. But if you want to talk a little bit more about what is it like being a parent or being with sickle cell, for anyone else who's experiencing that as well.
Being a mom is, I think, one of the biggest joys of life, but it is also some of the hardest work you will ever do in your entire life. I know for me, it is a challenge. It was especially when he was little, when they're so dependent on you, because now you're going from I'm doing self care to doing I'm doing baby care. Self care kind of becomes a back of the burner
Hmm.
discussion, or it's not something that you're able to even kind of look into on your own accord. You're forced to, hey, just live life and be a mom. Um, so being a mom and being a parent is one of the biggest joys I've ever had, but it is one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. And I've worked a lot over my life. I'm the female of 100 jobs at the same time because it's something I like to do. Apparently, is work myself. Um, but but I can tell you for one thing, it's really hard being a mommy because I want to make sure that my son gets everything from me that he
Hmm.
can. I still want to pour into him. I still want to see his smile and his giggle. I still want to do all the fun mommy things like going to the new parks and the new things. And he just asked me yesterday to go to Disney World, and I'm like, oh goodness, okay. So I think that that's going to happen probably next.
Hmm.
But it's definitely a challenge. And I think to any other mothers out there who have sickle cell, I think we can all can relate. But even if you're not a mother yet and you're looking to become a mother, giving yourself grace. Um, we're all, it's called, we're practicing being parents. No one gives you a book and says, this is how you parent. I wish that there was a manual on that, but they literally give you a child, you go and you have a baby and they send you home. And you have to kind of figure out how to feed said child, how to diaper, and all those things. So all those things are slightly magnified with sickle cell because, um, on top of that, you're still dealing with your own health and your own health
Hmm.
care and making sure that you're staying healthy, or you're dealing with crises, or organ damage and all the things that go along with sickle cell.
Hmm. Wow. So I want to transition to talking about kind of life transitions for you. So you already talked about being a parent and being a wife, but I'm also curious about how sickle cell has impacted other major life decisions, such as your work career choices or going to college, things like that.
Wow. Well, sickle cell has made, I think, because sickle cell, you know, people, you'll hear me say, and I have said it in the past, is sickle cell does not define me. And I think that that holds very true. I don't want sickle cell to ever define who I am. However,
Hmm.
I have to think about it when making any major life decision. And I've made a lot of big ones in my life. Nothing I do is small. I like to do everything big because the bigger the better. But I remember going to college. I remember applying to colleges all over the country, and the stark realization that I needed to have someone to help me, to take care of me. I needed someone who was going to kind of pour into me when I was sick and when I couldn't take care of myself. So that meant um, oftentimes kind of giving up those bigger dreams and those loftier dreams and settling to stay home and go to college at home or close to home.
Hmm.
It also meant things like when I did move to Texas, I remember telling my then fiance he had to marry me because I needed health insurance and I didn't care. And so I moved to Texas on a Sunday and we were married on a Thursday. So, and
Wow.
understanding like that had to happen very quickly.
Right.
I think we were engaged for maybe 3 months. And so it was very quick because I was like, I'm not moving to Texas without health insurance. And my health insurance isn't going to travel with me from my last job that I was leaving. So there were a lot of things I had to think about, a lot of big choices. Even having my son, we've thought about that and what the implications could mean on my health and my health care and my body. Um, so every decision that I make, I do take into consideration the fact that sickle cell may affect that, even with work. I worked in corporate America for many years. I worked for Johnson and Johnson, as well as I worked for Kraft Foods, and I worked at a brokerage firm. I worked in the medical industry. I've done a million different jobs in my life, um, but all of those jobs, one thing I had to do was constantly report in every day. I had 50 to 60-hour work weeks, and those were not helping me. If anything, they were harming me. So I had to learn how best to work for myself. And so that's when I kind of started doing my photography. And you can see I'm sitting in my studio in the background, but I had to work as a photographer. And I said, I'm going to create a business that works around my life instead of me working around my business. Um, and it allows me the flexibility to work independently as a photographer and take photos when I have the energy. And when I don't, I don't. I can certainly push through when I need to, but it's not necessarily um, you know, it's not detrimental to my job that I have to. And also, it led me into advocacy. This has become one of my biggest, I guess, spaces that I'm in is um, trying to really change the narrative of how sickle cell patients are looked at and seen, breaking down barriers of discrimination and bias, because sickle cell does affect mostly people of African American or in the United States of African American descent. However, it is not a Black disease. We don't say that. We don't call it that. Um, but there are a lot of barriers and there are a lot of discriminatory practices that are still out there, especially when walking into an emergency department or into a doctor's office. I was recently, like last year, I went to go to a new doctor and she called me a sickler. And in our realm, the word sickler is a derogatory term. And she called me that within the first 30 seconds of meeting me. And I
Wow.
remember just completely shutting down and
Mhm.
not being able to really hear what she had to say after that and being really hurt because here is someone who's supposed to be treating me and taking care of me. And the
Right.
first thing that out of their mouth is, you're a sickler. I remember being really turned off by that and cut up by that. And to know that that's kind of what I have to face as a sickle cell patient, there's kind of this uphill battle. So working in advocacy is close to my heart because I want to see everyone, not just medical professionals and not just, but I want to see patients do better. I want to see medical professionals do better. I want to see families understand better and learn to do better and to help disseminate out all the information that's out there. That was a long winded answer.
No, but that was great. You touched on a lot of really good points in your answers, so I appreciated the long-windedness. I'm sorry that you had that experience of, being called a sitter by a healthcare provider, and that makes me think of another question. What advice would you give to healthcare providers, especially as they're working with patients or warriors who have historically and systematically excluded?
Well, I think it's all about checking our bias. I feel that so often medical professionals, we all think that we don't have a bias towards anyone in particular, but we all have bias. And I think that um, my rule of thumb is to check my bias. So when I go to the emergency department, of course I have bias. I've been a patient for 42 years. It's a long time to be in and out of hospitals and in and out of emergency departments. And that's hundreds upon hundreds of doctors I've seen in my lifetime. So of course I have a bias towards doctors. I have a bias, and usually my bias is formed by the worst of the worst, right? Biases don't come because of pleasant experiences, usually. And so I have to remind practitioners when I'm being seen, just as you may have a bias about me because of simply because of my diagnosis, something that I didn't ask for, something that I didn't want, and something that, if anything, I would love to, to get rid of yesterday. You may have a bias because of that, but I may have a bias on you. So, in order for us to work together to have a seemingly cohesive relationship, we need to be able to rise above our bias, or this relationship isn't going to work. So, then
Right.
if you can't excuse your bias, because I'm willing to do so, I have to, because I need to get treatment, then you need to recuse yourself from my care because I need someone who's going to actually genuinely want and desire to see me better and to take care of me and get me out of here because my goal is to get back to my family.
Mhm.
So a lot of times it's just recognizing that we all have bias and how can we put that in check when we're seeing someone who we may disagree with, may not like. And if you have bias against my skin color, that's a whole nother set of problems. But
Right.
we need to be honest about that. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with a practitioner or a medical professional saying, I can't treat that patient because they don't want me to treat them. Because apparently I walked in the room with an attitude and they're kind of trying to figure out why. Like, what did I do? I don't want to be here either. There are a million places I'd want to be. I got into a car accident a few years back with my son in the car, and I went into the emergency department and I did not want to go. And I will fight tooth and nail to not go to the emergency department. And my doctor called me and said, you need to get your butt to the emergency room. And the reason why was it's because I have a clotting disease. I have become a clotter. I clot. And so she was afraid that the damage from the impact could have caused a potential clot in my
Mhm.
body. And I had already seen my physical therapist, and my physical therapist said, you're not great, but you can go home, and if you feel worse, then. But she actually wrote it in my notes, and so my doctor got a hold of it, and she called me and said, "Nope, nope, Miss Avant, you need to go to the hospital." And I'm like, "Absolutely not. Who do you think I am? Not dead nor dying." And she's like, "I do not care. You are not going to be dead nor dying on my watch." And I remember going in, and I was pissed off. I was just as frustrated as I could be. And I go in and she's called, mind you, she's on my phone. And she's like, "Are you there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm walking in now." So I get in, I sit for 9.5 hours in the
Oh,
emergency waiting
goodness.
room. I'm not seen. Mind you, my doctor is already on the phone with me and she's freaking out because she's like, "I need you to get looked at. You need to have at least have a basic chest x-ray because this could be detrimental to your health." And I'm like, "I'm fine." She's like, "You're always fine until you're not."
Right.
You're always fine until you're not. So I need you to get checked out. And I remember she was really, really like adamant, like, "You need to get checked out." And I said, "I've been here for 9 hours. Like, I'm pretty sure this is like a new record for me. Like, I haven't even gotten seen by anyone." And so she made a couple phone calls. And of course, they took me back. But the doctor who took me back was not pleased. He ripped down my shirt and he's like, "I need to see if you have seatbelt bruises." And I was so taken aback because I didn't
Mhm.
understand what it was I did because all I did was following someone's directions. I wasn't happy to be there either. Um, and he's like, "Well, you would have bruises if you got into a car accident." And I
Oh.
was like, "Oh." And I said, "Oh, are you saying that I didn't get into a car accident?" And he's like, "Well, I'm just saying it couldn't have been that bad." And
Mm.
I was like, just so taken back. And I said, "I don't think that this is going to work. I think I need to get another doctor." He's like, "Well, you're just going to have to wait." And he put me back in the emergency room
Gosh.
to wait. At that point, my doctor had then called me. Mind you, it had been a long time. So she's calling to check in, saying, "Hey, I don't see anything loading. There's no test results, no lab work. What's going on?" And do you know that I told her what happened, and she was like, "Okay, well, just leave because it I'll." And by this point, I think it was like late Sunday evening. She's like, "I'll just see you tomorrow morning. Come to my office and I'll order all the tests." So she actually ended up ordering the CAT scan for the next day. Then thankfully I
Mhm.
didn't have any DVTs or pulmonary embolisms and nothing sprouted from that. However, it could have been pretty bad.
Right.
And I was already being stubborn. I already didn't want to go. But the thing is it was almost one of those "I told you so" moments for her.
Mhm.
And while she understood, she said, like, I understand, and that's not fair, and it's not okay. And um, however, I really need you to go because had something had happened
Mhm.
during that time, you were had at least been in a place where they could have treated you quickly. But it was very frustrating for me. And the only reason I could imagine being treated as poorly as I was because of my diagnosis. Not because I got into a car accident, not because of the color of my skin, but simply because of my diagnosis. He thought I was there trying to get drugs, when in reality, I was just trying to, I didn't perish.
Mm. I'm sorry you had to go through such a traumatic experience on top of another traumatic experience of being in the car accident. So it's just, you go to these places thinking you're going to get treated and get better, but sometimes it's not the case. So yeah, I'm sorry. Um, I guess one other point that I wanted to go back to in your other answer, you talk about the importance of health insurance. And I remember you mentioning this to me before, but I want you to kind of explain to our audience what it's like navigating private health insurance with sickle cell disease.
Oh, well, that's a loaded question, but there's so many different types of health insurance, right? There's privatized and then there's public. I've never been a patient of receiving um, public health insurance. I've never been able to receive Medicare or Medicaid. My family's always made too much, which I think is, you think in terms of that is like, oh, that's a blessing. But for me, health insurance it's gotten to the point of being ghastly. To have a chronic medical condition in today's world with private health insurance, if it's not even halfway decent health insurance, you end up spending so much money. I know that I can tell you last year I was really excited. Paid off all my medical debt last year. I had about $32,000 medical debt. And I was so proud of myself because that was after we are already paid $400 a month per person in my family
Hmm.
for health insurance. And I was so happy. I was so excited. I was super elated that I paid it off. I was like so proud of myself. I'm like, you did this. You paid off all this debt. You did this. This is you. You did this. And then, like, I want to say by like May of this year, I'm already $17,000 back in debt.
Wow.
And it's almost like I just did all of that for what? And you get really frustrated and it's really hurtful and it's really like I feel like I'm constantly digging a hole that's constantly being filled in by someone else and there's no way out. I have a chronic medical condition and I have to pay out of pocket maximums and co-insurance and co-pays
Hmm.
and on top of that, I'm paying for my own health insurance out of my own pocket. Like I have no help. And there are plans out there that help, but you have to make under a certain amount. And my husband thankfully makes over that. However, do I want to spend every penny that I earn in medical bills? Or would I like rather go to, I don't know, say Disney World with my 6-year old?
Hmm.
So it's always like I feel like I'm constantly shoveling
Hmm.
and I can't get out of this rat race of medical bills and medical debt. And it's so disheartening. It's not talked about a lot in the community because so many of us are warriors that we're out there, we're on Medicaid or Medicare. And I think that their journey is so different, right? A lot of time for them, it's more or less getting approvals. Well, I have to do that as well. I'm also dealing with just the massive financial burden of trying to figure it all out year to year. And like I said, being proud of myself. And my husband graciously said to me a couple months ago, he's like, "Oh, Hev, you did really good. You paid $32,000 off last year." I was like, "Yeah, I was really excited." And he's like, "Yeah, did you see that new bill?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And then he's like, "Well, you keep going, girlfriend." And it's like I'm taking all of my money, that my hard-earned money, and I'm putting it towards medical bills so that the money that my husband brings in can go towards things like our mortgage and, you know, our son and and all those things. So it's just a very sad space to be in sometimes. It's very frustrating because it feels like you're getting beat not only physically because you're dealing with sickle cell, which is a beating, and then you're emotional, the trauma, hospitalizations, dealing with people who don't believe you, dealing with tests that go awry or that don't work at all, and you have to do them again, which is more money, and you know it's like a constant state of just being beaten up. and trying to find the light and the joy in all of that mess.
Wow. So, based on the experiences that you just described, if you could say anything to any policymaker or stakeholder that could help with that type of situation, what is one thing that you would advocate for?
Oh, I would say sickle cell patients is being a sickle cell patient, it's one of like the leading, it's like one of the highest rated, what is it? It's considered a rare disease, which is funny because there's so many people in our country with it. Um, but the funding for sickle cell research, the funding for comprehensive sickle cell centers, there's just not money there to back us to help teach nurses and doctors how to take care of us. Sickle cell is one of the few diseases. I don't think there are really a lot out there that affect every single part of your body. You know, where the blood goes, it's affected. So everywhere from the top of our head, my hair to the bottom of my toes is affected by sickle cell. So I would love for there to be some type of comprehensive like backing, some money to go behind not only the study for research, right? I do a lot with curative therapies, but also just the day to day, the ins and outs, um, psychological care, mental health care, financial advisors. How do you navigate through this as a sickle cell patient? How do you live
Mhm.
as someone with this disease financially and still send your kid to college or pay off your own college debt? I'm still paying for university simply because I spent the first half of my younger life paying for my medical bills,
Mhm.
trying to make sure that I got those taken care of because those would go on my credit report and I was paying very little at my student loans at one point in time. So how do we do that and how do we navigate that? So offering just cohesive help, and if that's a comprehensive sickle cell center, somewhere I can go to get all my needs met. I can go get my medication. I can go get infused or infusions if I need it. I can go get financial help. I can go get mental health help. I have people there who believe me, who are going to be kind to me and not treat me like I am a drug seeker, and who are really going to reach out and um, genuinely try to help me without this massive stigma that just looms over me that I can't shake, nor do I deserve.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that comprehensive answer, and I hope that we can get something like that soon in the future. One final question I was thinking about was, what advice would you give to people who are finding out that they have sickle cell, or even for caregivers who are having to navigate for the first time, for example, caring for a child who's just been diagnosed with sickle cell?
Wow. There's a lot of people who have differing opinions on all of that. What you just asked, the whole question. There's so Having sickle cell is complicated. I advise community, creating a community, finding community. One thing about sickle cell, one thing about us as patients is we're resilient, but there's so many of us out there, and we get together for Warrior Con. It's a whole convention circled around warriors and having fun and learning about different therapies that are out there, getting involved, sending your children to camps, understanding that life isn't over because of a diagnosis. It's just beginning, and learning how to work around that diagnosis, how to work around what are the workarounds? What are the ways that we can take shortcuts? What are the ways that we really want to sit down and talk to someone? But knowing that you're not alone. There are a lot of us out there going through very similar things. Um, there are a lot of people who want to help. There are a lot of different organizations. It's just a matter of finding your people and then being able to get outside your box, speak to new people, speak to new communities, uh, ask a lot of questions, and learn that it's not a death sentence. Um, but you can live free, you can live happy, You can live hopeful lives with sickle cell. It's just a matter of finding your space and allowing yourself room for a ton of grace. But our community accepts all newcomers. We welcome newcomers. We're here and we want to teach newcomers. We want to show you what sickle cell is and what it isn't. We want to show you what is on the horizon as far as curative therapies, as treatments, new medications. Um, Everyone has a story to tell, including me. I'm here telling my little snippet. Um, but just knowing that sickle cell isn't the end, it's just the beginning, and it's how you kind of live it that's going to make the difference.
Oh, Heather, your story is so powerful and impactful, and I'm sure that just sharing today has really touched a lot of lives and just has the potential to just do a lot of things. So I really appreciate your time today with sharing with us and our audience about your experiences. And I hope that everything goes well moving forward.
Oh, thank you, Bria, for thank you for hosting the interview for me and jumping in. I know that this is a odd question for your big cousin to ask because I am her big cousin.
Anytime,
I think
though.
but I always call her baby cousin. Hey, baby cuz. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this. I know that there's so much out there. There's so much to share. There's so much light in sickle cell. It's not all death and heaviness. You just have to know where to find it.